Hello, this is part two of graphing sine graphs. So on the first video lecture, I went over the characteristics of the sine graphs and what you really need to all the stuff you need to graph a sine graph properly. So now that we know the tools, let's start graphing. So on number one, it says graph one cycle of the sine graph. So it's only asking for one cycle, not two. So what do we need? What we need is a few things. We need what we need is max, min, and hold on. Sorry. Yes. So what we need is max, min, midway. What else? Critical values. So let's start with our max. So the max is related to the amplitude. So the amplitude is absolute value of -2, which is 2 and -2. Do we have a vertical shift? No, we don't. We do not have a vertical shift. So that means our max is going to be 2. My min is -2. And my midway is the average between the two, right? 2 plus -2 over 2, which is 0. Okay. And then what else do we need? We need max, min, and midway, and then what is our period? Well, we don't have our horizontal shift, so that's good. We don't have a vertical shift. So what is our period? Our period is 2 pi over b. What is our b value? It's basically the number in front of x. There's no number, so that means there is an invisible 1. So your period is 2 pi over 1. Okay. And then, yeah, so now what we're going to do is kind of graph it. Well, let's find our critical values, or at least one of them. So to find the critical values, you take the period divided by 4. So my period is 2 pi. Divide that by 4, and that can be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 2. Okay. So what that means is you start at pi over 2, and then you just keep on adding pi over 2 until you end to the period. Okay, so we only have to graph one cycle. That's good. Okay, so our max is 2, so it's going to be 1, 2, and then our min is -2, -1, -2. So what we need is our critical values, so it's going to be pi over 2. And then you just keep on adding pi over 2. So pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Keep on adding. That's 2 pi plus 1 pi. That's 3 pi over 2. Keep on adding. That's 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. Okay, so you can stop there. You have 4 critical values. The reason why we have 4 is because we don't have a horizontal. If we had a horizontal shift, it would be at least 5. Okay, so now we have our critical values. We have our max, our min. Our midway is 0. And usually if you look at the parent graph, the sine graph, it starts at the origin. But I'm not sure because there is a -2, so that means there's a reflection. So if you're not sure, what you could do is plug in I would plug in 2 points. That's it. Because after that, it's just it's a cycle. It's either going to go max, midway, or min, right? So let's start with the x value 0. That's -2 sin of 0. And the sin of 0 is 0. So this would be 0. Okay. And then let's plug in the x value pi over 2. Okay, let me get my unit circle. So the sin of pi over 2 is 1, right? So if you look at your unit circle, the sine of pi over 2 is 1 times by -2, which is -2. Okay. Okay, that's good enough because as you can see, you see the cycle. It started at 0, which is your midway, and then at pi over 2 it has a y value of -2. So that means you're going to have to go at pi, it's going to start at your midway again. So at pi it goes at 0. And then 3 pi over 2 starts at your max, which is at 2. And then at 2 pi midway, right? So there's your one cycle sine graph. Okay, so that's it. That is one cycle. If you want to write 2 cycles, what you could do is, since you already found your 4 critical values, this could be -pi over 2, -pi, -3 pi over 2, and -2 pi. So I think you know that if you're not sure, just plug it in. So a -pi over 2, that would be, I don't know, -pi over 2 is the same thing as +3 pi over 2. So that has a sign value of -1 times it by -2, which is +2. So it starts at 2. So that's good because I know enough that when at your max, and then it has at -pi, it's going to go midway. And then at 3 pi over 2, it's going to be at minimum. And then over here, it's minimum, right? Just like that. Okay, so but thing is, we only have to do one cycle, so that's only if you want to write 2 cycles. Okay, go ahead and pause and take a minute to write all that down. Let's move on to example 2. Graph one cycle of the sine graph, so we have y equals 1/4 sin of 2 pi x. So let's find our max, min, and midway. So our max is, well, the amplitude is absolute value 1/4, which is 1/4 and -1/4. And there's no vertical shift, so that's good. So that means your max is 1/4. Since we're gonna have to write it, it's gonna be 0.25. Your min is -1/4, which is -0.25. Your midway is the average. So that's 1/4 plus -1/4 over 2, so that's 0. Okay, and then what else do we need? We need to find the period, which is 2 pi over b. That's 2 pi, and then my b value is the number in front of x. So the number in front of x is 2 pi. So it's 1. And then to find the critical values, you take the period divided by 4. So your period is 1 and then you divide that by 4, so that's 1/4. Okay, so now we have enough to graph. Here's 1, so 1/4 be like, it's less than 1, right? So you could put 1/4 here, and then here's -1. This would be -1/4. Okay, and then we start at 1/4, or we start at our critical value 1/4, and then you keep on adding to 1/4 until you end up to 1, right? So 1/4 plus 1/4 is 2/4, which is 1/2. 1/2 plus 1/4 is 3/4. And keep on adding 4/4, which is 1. And then figure out, plug in your 0. I'm going to plug in 2 points because I'm not sure. Usually sine graph goes through the origin, right? But I'm not 100% sure. So just plug in 2 values. Let's start with the x value 0. So that is 1/4 then of 2 pi, and then replace x with 0. So that would be sin of 0 times it by 1/4. So the sin of 0 is technically 0. So yeah, it does go through the origin. And then let's plug in 1/4. Okay, so 2 pi times 1/4, that's 2 pi 4, which can be reduced by 2, so that would be 1/2. Okay, so the sin of 1/2 is, what is the sin of 1/2? It is, let me double check my work. Oh, no, so we're missing the pi, so pi over 2, right? So what is the sin of pi over 2? Divide. Here, let me write this. So wait, so how you got pi over 2? Because 2 pi over 4 can be reduced by 2, so that would be pi over 2. So what is the sin of pi over 2? 1. It is 1. And then you have to times it by 1/4, so that is 1/4. Okay, so that's good because we know it went from the midway max, and then at 1/2, it has to go through the midway again because it's a cycle. And then at 3/4, it has to go through the minimum, which is -1/4. And then at 1, you start at your midway again. So you see the cycle, right? It's either, so we went from midway max, and then midway minimum, and then midway. Yeah, it's just a repeating cycle. Okay, that is your graph. Okay, let's move on. Example 3. Okay, so we have graph 1 cycle of the sine graph, y equals -2 sin of 6x. So let's see, let's find our max. Our max is related to the amplitude, which is -2, absolute value of -2, which is 2 and -2. And there's no vertical shift, so it doesn't mess with the max and min. So your max is 2. Your min is -2. Your midway is the average, which is 2 plus -2 over 2, which is 0. And then what else? Period is 2 pi over b. So it's going to be 2 pi. And then your b value is always the b value is always a number in front of x. So in our case, our b value is 6. So 2 pi over 6 can be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 3. Okay. And then let's find your critical values. So it's just the period over 4. So our period is pi over 3 divided by 4. So we have a complex fraction. So you can rewrite this as pi over 3 divided by 4 over 1. Okay, cross multiply. So that is pi over 12. Okay, so that is good. Okay, so your max is 2. Your minimum is -2. And then you start at, what do we do? We start at pi over 12. And then you keep on adding pi over 12 until you stop at pi over 3, right? So pi over 12 plus pi over 12 is 2 pi over 12, which is reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 6. 12 divided by 2. Yes, pi over 6. And then keep adding pi over 12. Divide this by 2. That's 2 pi plus 1 pi is 3 pi over 12. So that is going to be pi over 4. And then add another pi over 12. So that's 3 pi plus 1 pi. That is 4 pi over 12, which can be reduced by 4. So that would be pi over 3. Okay, we could stop there because that is our period. Now let's plug in, and because of this -2, that means there is a reflection. So let's just plug in 2 points and then we'll go from there. So let's plug in the x value 0. So right here, that is -2 sin of 6 times 0. So that is the sin of 0. Where's my -2? So the sin of 0 is 0. Okay. And then let's plug in the x value, pi over 12. Is going to be sin of 6 pi over 12, which can be reduced by 6. So that would be pi over 12 divided by 6 is 2. So sin of pi over 2 is 1, right? Sin of pi over 2 is 1, and then times by -2, so that is -2. Okay, so at pi over 12, you have a y put of -2, so that's good because we see the cycle. So it went from midway, minimum, and then at pi over 6, it has to go through midway, and then pi over 4, you have to go through your max, which is 2, and then pi over 3, midway. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's do example 4. We have y equals 3 sin of x plus pi. So this time we have a phase shift. So we haven't done it. We haven't done one with a phase shift, so we'll do one. Okay, so let's first find our max. Our max is the amplitude of 3, which is absolute value 3, which is 3 and negative 3. And we don't have a vertical shift, so that means our max is 3. Our min is negative 3. And then our midway is 0, right? Because it's the average, 3 plus negative 3 over 2, which is 0 over 2, which is 0. Okay, and then what else? Our period is 2 pi over b. So it's 2 pi, and then our b value is the number in front of x. So there's no number here, so that means there is an invisible 1. So that is 2 pi. Okay. Okay, now we do have a phase shift. So our phase shift is, how do you find the phase shift? So if you remember from our lecture, you set whatever the parentheses to 0 and then solve for x. So our parentheses is x plus pi, set it to 0, and then subtract pi, solve for x. Okay, so that's our phase shift, which is negative pi. Okay, so and then we still got to find our critical values. So the critical values are period over 4. So my period is what's my period? My period is 2 pi. And then divide that by 4, so that could be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 2. Okay. So you keep on adding pi over 2 until you get so what is our last point? It's no longer going to be the period. It's actually the last point is the phase shift plus the period. So usually in the previous examples, the last point was the period, but because we have a phase shift, the last point is the phase shift plus the period. So let's figure that out. So our phase shift is negative pi, and then our period is 2 pi, right? Negative pi, and the period is 2 pi. That gives you 2 pi minus 1 pi, which is pi. Okay, I think we have enough to graph it. So our max is 3, so you go 1, 2, 3. And then our minimum is negative 3, so that's 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then we start, our first critical value is our phase shift, which is at negative pi. And then you keep on adding pi over 2, and then you're going to eventually end up at pi, right? So what's negative pi plus pi over 2? It's negative 2 pi plus 1 pi is negative pi over 2. So you start at negative pi, and then your next one is at negative pi over 2. And then you keep on adding pi over 2. So it's 0. And then pi over 2. And then add another pi over 2. That's pi plus 1 pi plus 1 pi is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. And that's where you stop, right? Because that is your phase shift. I mean, the last point is the phase shift plus the period. Okay, so That's the only difference from the other example is the phase shift. Okay, okay, so I have no idea how this graph would look like. What you could do is plug in a few points. So let's plug in the x value negative pi. So that is 3 sin of 0. Sin of 0 is 0. And then negative pi over 2 is 2 pi minus 1 pi is pi over 2. So what is the sin of pi over 2? It is 1. And then you have to times this by 3, because that's still part of the problem, which is 3. Okay, that's good because you just found that you just did the cycle. So you went from midway, max, and then at 0, I believe it's going to be, I think it's going to be 0 because if you plug in 0, that would be sin of pi. Yeah, it's 0. I was just double checking, but it's a cycle. And then at pi over 2 is going to be at your minimum, which is negative 3. And then at pi is 0. That is that. And that is your graph. That is one cycle. Okay, let's move on. Okay, example 5, graph one cycle of the sine graph. It's just like example 4. Do you want me to, yeah, let's do this one together. So let's see, our max is going to be 4. Our min is negative 4. Our midway is 0. Phase shift is negative pi over 4. Right, I just set the parentheses x plus pi over 4 to 0, and you get negative pi over 4. What else? The period is 2 pi over b. So that's 2 pi, and the b value is 1, which is 2 pi. And then what else? What else? What else? What else? Oh yes, the critical value. So it's the period over 4. So the period is 2 pi. Divide that by 4. That could be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 2. And then because we have a phase shift, the last point is the phase shift plus the period. So the phase shift is negative pi over 4. And then the period is 2 pi. 8 pi minus 1 pi is 7 pi over 4. Okay, and then your first starting point is at negative pi over 4. And then you keep on adding, so this is your critical value, you keep on adding pi over 2 until you stop at 7 pi over 4, right? So, yeah, negative pi over 4 plus pi over 2 is 2 pi minus 1 pi, that is pi over 4. Okay, so we start at, our next one is at pi over 4. The next one is going to be, you keep on adding pi over 2. 2 pi plus 1 pi is 3 pi. One adding pi over 2, 3 pi. 2 pi plus 3 pi is 5 pi over 4. And then I think our last one is 7 pi over 4. So let's see, add pi over 2. And that's it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is plot some of these points. So let's plug in negative pi over 4. Negative pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 0. Sin of 0 is 0. That's 0. And then let's plug in 0. Let's plug in 0 and then pi over 4, just to be sure. So 4 sin, and then replace x with 0. So 0 plus pi over 4 is pi over 4. Sin of pi over 4 is radical 2 over 2. And then you have 4, which is 2 radical 2, which is 2.8. So that's really not really part of our max. That's why I got a 2.8, 1, 2, here's 3. So 2.8 would be right about here. And then pi over 4, I have to plug in pi over 4. Okay, so pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4, which can be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 2. So sin of pi over 2 is 1 times by 4. Okay, so it went at your max. Okay, that's enough. You don't have to go and you don't have to plug in any more points because it's the cycle, right? So, and then 3 pi over 4, it's going to have to go in your midway. At 5 pi over 4, it's going to have to go in your minimum. I'm going to fix this. And then at 7 pi over 4 midway. Okay, so that is your, it's going to look like this. Okay, that is your graph. That is one cycle. Okay, I think that is enough. That is all examples. I think the next one will be a quiz.